Imagine 5 men stepping out of a black sedan at 2:17 a.m., each carrying a Thompson submachine gun heavy enough to pull their coats crooked, each convinced the street already belonged to them. The metal was cold. The night smelled of wet brick and coal smoke. Somewhere nearby, a radio played softly through an open window, unaware it was about to be remembered forever. They had been told this would take less than a minute. Walk in, spray the room, walk out. Harlem would wake up quieter. What they didn't know, what no one south of 125th Street ever fully understood, was that Harlem listened before it moved. And it remembered faces. And it buried secrets deeper than bodies. This is not the story of a gunfight. It's the story of a mistake made by men who believed power traveled with bullets, not people. On May 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz sent 5 armed professionals to erase Bumpy Johnson from Harlem. By sunrise, the wrong names were being whispered. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And before we begin, tell me in the comments, what time is it, where you're watching from, and what city are you in? Because this night didn't just change Harlem, it changed how power learned to hide. Dutch Schultz did not shout when he decided. He never did. On May 20th, 1935, in a second-floor office above a closed bar near East 54th Street, Schultz sat with a folded racing form beside his coffee cup, calculating Harlem the way other men calculated odds. To him, Bumpy Johnson wasn't a myth. He was a variable, and variables could be eliminated. Schultz trusted arithmetic more than loyalty. 5 men, each paid $3,000 up front, a serious number during a year when the average New York worker earned less than $1,400 annually. 2 Thompsons came from his Bronx stash. 3 more were borrowed through an Irish pipeline serial numbers already filed smooth. Ammunition counted twice 250 rounds total, enough to turn a room into a rumor. What bothered Schultz wasn't Johnson's muscle, it was his patience. Harlem had ignored Schultz's numbers for years. His bookies vanished. His trucks were stalled, taxed, rerouted. Not loudly, quietly. Johnson didn't confront, he redirected. And that was harder to kill. Schultz's notebook that night listed times, addresses, habits. But next to Johnson's name, there was only one word written smaller than the rest. Unpredictable. At 11:42 p.m., Schultz closed the notebook. No speeches, no threats, just a nod. The order moved down a chain so clean, it looked safe handler to driver, to gunman, to Harlem. Schultz believed distance protected him, that bullets traveled faster than consequences. He was wrong. Because by the time the 5 men crossed north, Harlem already knew the math didn't add up. Harlem did not panic, it adjusted. On the morning of May 21st, 1935, barbers paused mid-cut on Lenox Avenue, scissors hanging in the air, just long enough to catch a phrase drifting in from the street. Numbers runners stopped counting. A delivery boy took the long way around a corner he had walked his entire life. No one announced danger. They didn't need to. Information in Harlem didn't move in straight lines. It bent, it echoed, it arrived early. By noon, at least 3 separate warnings had already reached the same destination, each different in detail, identical in meaning. 5 men. Not locals, heavy coats despite the heat, cars idling too long at intersections. One woman noticed the way a stranger's hand never left his pocket. Another noticed a car that turned around twice on the same block. Small things, always small things. Inside a back room above a dry cleaner near West 132nd Street, a chipped porcelain coffee cup sat untouched on a crate. The coffee had gone cold. That mattered. It meant the conversation had ended quickly. Decisions were already made. No alarms were raised. Instead, doors closed softly. Routes shifted. Meetings dissolved. A card game that had run every Tuesday for 6 years didn't happen. Someone folded a newspaper and left it on a chair as a signal that would mean nothing to an outsider and everything to the right person. Harlem had learned long ago that survival wasn't about force. It was about timing. That afternoon, over 200 businesses along a 4-block stretch altered their routines without explanation. No records would ever show it. No police report would mention it. But when night came, the streets felt thinner, emptier in the wrong places, heavier in the right ones. The 5 men never noticed. They mistook quiet for fear. And by the time the sun disappeared behind the rooftops, Harlem had already decided where the violence would end. The ambush was scheduled for 2:17 a.m., timed to the minute. That precision would later feel ironic. The location was a narrow stretch near West 133rd Street, chosen because sound echoed their brick walls, tight corners, no easy exits. The handler had walked it twice with a stopwatch. From door to curb, 11 steps. From curb to car, 6 seconds if no one hesitated. 5 men took positions, 2 at the front, 1 covering the rear, 2 across the street, Thompson's angled downward fingers already sore from the weight. They were expecting Bumpy Johnson to arrive alone, or nearly alone. The notebook said he disliked crowds late at night. The notebook was wrong. What came instead was silence thicker than expected. No footsteps, no laughter drifting from windows. A streetlight flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows that didn't move the way shadows should. One of the gunmen adjusted his grip, a small motion, enough. The first shot didn't echo, it was swallowed. Then came another from the side. No one was watching, not a Thompson. A single deliberate crack. One man dropped without a sound, his gun hitting the pavement harder than his body. Panic arrived late. By the time the Thompsons roared to life, they were firing at angles that no longer mattered. Witnesses later counted less than 12 seconds from first shot to last. When it ended, 4 men lay bleeding, one still breathing and trying to crawl. His coat had twisted, trapping his arm beneath him. He never got free. The car never moved. The driver had already stepped away. By 2:19 a.m. it was over. No speeches, no chase. Just smoke hanging low, and a street that had already gone quiet again, as if nothing had happened at all. Dawn revealed what darkness had concealed. At 5:06 a.m., a sanitation truck slowed near West 133rd Street. The driver noticed a shoe in the gutter separated from its owner by a few careful feet. He didn't stop. He wrote the location on a scrap of paper and kept going. By the time police arrived, the street had already edited itself. There were 5 bodies, all strangers, all white, all armed. That detail mattered. Newspapers would later count 37 shell casings, but only 19 matched Thompson rounds. The rest came from smaller weapons, older, quieter, carried by men who didn't want attention. The official explanation never reconciled that difference. It didn't try very hard. One man had a folded photograph in his inside pocket, a woman, 2 children. The edges were worn soft-handled often. Another had a train ticket dated 3 days earlier, stamped from Newark. None of them carried Harlem addresses. None of them carried names that meant anything north of Central Park. By mid-morning, rumors outran facts. Some said Johnson had been there. Some said he'd watched from a window. Some insisted he'd been miles away drinking coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. No version could be proven. All of them survived. This was the moment Harlem understood something had shifted. Dutch Schultz had sent violence into Harlem. Harlem had returned it cleaner, quieter, final. Here's the question. People still argue about, did Harlem spare Johnson because he was powerful or because killing him would have been unnecessary? That afternoon, 3 independent bookmaking operations resumed business without interference. By nightfall, Schultz's runners stopped showing up entirely. No announcements were made, no victories claimed. Power didn't celebrate, it reorganized. 5 funerals were held south of Harlem that week. None of the names appeared in Harlem conversations. The streets had decided who belonged and who never would again. The change didn't announce itself, it settled. In the weeks after May 23, 1935, men who had once spoken loudly began lowering their voices without realizing it. On June 2nd, at a diner near 145th Street, a bookmaker folded his newspaper twice instead of once before standing up. No one asked why. They didn't need to. Small habits were being rewritten. What had shifted was not territory, it was expectation. Before that night, violence in Harlem followed an outside rhythm downtown, orders uptown, consequences. Afterward, the rhythm reversed. Decisions were now made closer to the sidewalks, closer to people who would actually bleed if calculations went wrong. Police statistics quietly reflected it. In the 3 months following the shooting, reported armed incursions by non-Harlem crews dropped by nearly 40% in northern Manhattan. No memo explained it. No task force took credit. The numbers simply bent in one direction and stayed there. Inside a rented room on St. Nicholas Avenue, a confiscated notebook lay open on a table, its pages smudged where rain had once touched ink. It listed names that would never be crossed out because no one planned to act on them anymore. Planning itself had become risky. Men close to Bumpy Johnson noticed the change in him too. He slept longer. He spoke less. When he did speak, he asked questions instead of giving instructions. That was the real transformation. Power no longer needed to prove it could kill. It needed to prove it could wait. Ask yourself this and be honest. What frightens you more, a man who reacts instantly, or one who lets you move first? By late summer, 3 former Schultz-connected operations quietly sought permission to continue doing business uptown. Permission, not protection. The word itself marked the shift. No celebration followed, no public acknowledgement. Just a new silence heavier than before. And silence in Harlem was never empty. Years later, the graves told the story more honestly than the papers ever had. The 5 men were buried separately between June and July of 1935 in cemeteries scattered across Queens, Newark, and the Bronx. No shared headstone. No shared dates carved deep enough to invite questions. Just names that meant nothing in Harlem and everything to families who never received full explanations. One headstone was paid for in cash, another wasn't paid at all. A man who attended one of the funerals later said there were fewer than 12 people present counting the priest. No flowers from employers, no envelopes slipped into hands, the kind of quiet reserved for mistakes that no one wants to remember making. Back in Harlem, the street moved on, but it remembered. Not loudly, not romantically, just accurately. Children who grew up hearing the story learned it without names, without dates. Only the lesson survived. Don't come north assuming you're invisible. Don't confuse firepower with belonging. By 1937, Dutch Schultz would be dead himself, gunned down in Newark after overplaying another calculation. Some whispered Harlem had smiled when the news arrived. Others said nothing at all. A folded newspaper appeared on a chair, then disappeared. As for Bumpy Johnson, he never claimed credit, never corrected rumors, never denied them either. He understood something most men didn't. Legends last longer when they refuse to speak. A final image stayed with those who were there. A quiet street, early morning light, 5 shadows erased by routine. Harlem didn't bury heroes that night. It buried assumptions. And once assumptions die, power has no choice but to evolve or vanish. History often pretends it moves in straight lines. Orders given, shots fired, outcomes recorded, but real power never behaves so neatly. It bends, it listens, it waits. What happened in Harlem in the spring of 1935 was not a victory in the way headlines understand victory. It was something quieter, heavier, and far more permanent. 5 men arrived believing force would solve a problem. An entire neighborhood responded by reminding the world that context matters more than courage and belonging matters more than guns. What lingers isn't the violence itself, but the restraint that followed, the silence that settled afterward like dust in morning light. The way men changed how they spoke, the way plans were written in pencil instead of ink, the way history remembered some names and let others dissolve into rumor. This is how forgotten legends survive, not through monuments, but through behavior, not through applause, but through avoidance. When we talk about power, we often imagine explosions, but the truth is colder. Power is when violence becomes unnecessary, when reputation moves faster than bullets, when a street decides it has already seen enough blood. Harlem remembered that night without celebrating it, and maybe that's why it mattered.